Uh, this session is going to just talk about the way ahead, ASEAN-India relation. And the session will be chaired by Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, and very eminent lineup of the panelists. Ambassador To Sin Tan, Vietnam ambassador in India, Mr. Rajat Nag, everybody knows him. Dr. Phillips Varmonte, Executive Director CSIS, all the way from Jakarta. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, who was our former Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs, and Professor Sutipan Chirativat, who is the chairman of the Chula Global Network and the Executive Director, ASEAN Studies Center. So these are the 5 speakers. Session will be moderated by Ambassador Bhatia. Sir, over to you, sir. At 15 minutes late, so we try to finish by 5:15. Thank you.
I can see it, they're very interesting. Well, thank you, dear friends, for being back from your coffee very quickly. I would like to start by thanking RIS, and particularly my very dear friend Mohan Kumar, for the invitation for me to chair this important session of a very important conference. We do have a stellar panel, as Prabir just mentioned to you, which comprises the serving ambassador, known for his pro-activism and boldness, a Mandarin each from the Asian Development Bank and the Ministry of External Affairs, who contributed much and continue to contribute, and 2 respected thought leaders, first from one of the best known think tanks of the region, and the other from one of the most reputed universities in Asia. The stellar panel has a challenging theme too, and this relates to an integrated Asia at a time when the world may be fragmenting, and when some feel that Asian unity and the prospects for an Asian century have become questionable. What is the way forward for India-ASEAN partnership in this specific context? That is the issue. I'm sure that we shall go beyond presenting a diagnosis and offer some solid policy advice. This is an apt time to do so because the commemorative summit, the special commemorative summit, is just a few days away. I'm very happy that our panel has a majority of scholars and diplomats from ASEAN, and only a minority belongs to India. This is how a proper dialogue should be. In order to spur some serious deliberations, let me make some brief opening remarks, essentially to delineate the contours of the theme as I understand it today. ASEAN is an association that is in the process of transforming itself into three communities, or a community with three pillars: political, strategic, economic, and socio-cultural. I assume that our analysis will cover all the three dimensions. So very brief remarks on each of these dimensions. On political strategic aspects, the broad geopolitical context, which is dynamic, needs to be taken into consideration. In 1917, I repeat, in 1917, no leader, scholar, or seer could predict that the First World War would end in 2 years, that it would be followed by a 20-year-long armistice, and then by another bigger war that would see the world divided into two large camps and a non-aligned bloc. Similarly, frankly speaking, we do not really know what may happen in 2030 or 2040 and thereafter. But I think we have some idea of what we may expect in the coming decade or so. How do we expect to deal with the region of East Asia, which might witness China rising and the US retreating, as we actually saw in course of 2017, or a China-US condominium with China as the principal partner, or a China-US Cold War, or even worse, an open confrontation and conflict. This is a central question at a stage when the concept of open and inclusive security architecture has apparently proved to be deficient. It is also accompanied by unprecedented stress on the unity and centrality of ASEAN. Now, on the economic dimensions, we just had a very heated and educative debate. We have our own perspective to offer to you. I think we hear a lot more loudly what ASEAN wants from India, and a little less clearly what India wants from ASEAN. Deficit in delivery makes the discussion somewhat imbalanced. However, in our view, deficit applies to the ASEAN side as well as to the Indian side. Objectively speaking, once again, we both have to deliver better. For example, both the need for a speedy completion of the trilateral highway project and negotiating a balanced and mutually beneficial RCEP bear relevance to our discussion today. And finally, as regards the socio-cultural connect, there are two key points to be made in the context of integrated Asia. Number one, our both geographies are committed to establishing inclusive societies. We will get there someday in the future if we work alone. But if we work together, we may get there faster. Hence, mutual dialogue, cooperation, learning from each other, and sharing best practices should be turned into regular habits as far as India and ASEAN are concerned. Two, while our rich and shared heritage provides immense inspiration, and we keep reflecting on it all the time, India and ASEAN need to contemporize their relationship and make it of value to the present and future generations. The challenge is to agree on how to pave the road together. Like you all, I'm very keen and interested to listen to our panelists and later to some of you who might contribute to the Q&A that is bound to follow. So at this stage, thank you very much for your attention. And I would very much now like to request Ambassador Thon Sin Than to address you. We are going on, I guess, 15 minutes or so, or rule, and then thereafter we would have a panel discussion, full house discussion. Thank you.
So, thank you, Ambassador Razif Bachir, and the other panelists, Ambassador Anin Natwa, and dear colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. We are talking about a very important topic on the ASEAN-India partnership in the context of Asia integration. But I rather say that it should be in the context of Asia-Pacific integration. We understand that there are two parallel integration processes in Asia-Pacific. The first is the market-driven integration, and second is the institutional integration. These two processes are closely related and complemented to each other. The market-driven integration in Asia, which started from Japan in the 70s last century, then moved to the newly industrialized countries in the 80s, then to China in the 90s, and now is moving down to Southeast Asia and South Asia. And I would rather say that the integration process now also expand to between Pacific region and also Indian Ocean. So we can call it the integration process here is include also Indo-Pacific region. And it is not only driven by market, but also by security aspects. The result of this integration process is that trade among Asian nations now have accounted for about 50% of the total of their total trade. This is higher than the trade among NAFTA countries. And it is, of course, lower than the EU integration. But it is a success of the integration market-driven process in Asia. And the investment among Asian nations also have increased drastically. And it's clearly that this integration process have benefited almost all nations in the region, which have become fastest growing region in the world for quite many years now. The institutional integration in Asia was interestingly started by ASEAN by initiating the dialogue partner system since the end of the 80s. And the ASEAN Plus 3, which include the Northeast Asian nations, came into being in 1997. And then in 2005, the East Asia Summit, with the participation of India, and expanded the institutional integration process to South Asia. The special feature of this process, the institutional process, is that it is gradually covering major sub-regions: Northeast region, Southeast Asia, and then now South Asia. And it includes all major powers in Asia. And the second feature of this process is the leading and central role of ASEAN. ASEAN initiated all this process. The inclusion of India in both market-driven and institutional integration process in Asia, in fact, has changed the whole landscape of the regional cooperation and integration in this part of the world. With ASEAN-India dialogue partnership, and then the participation of India in East Asia Summit process, and now India as part of Indo-Pacific free and open Indo-Pacific region, the Asian regional cooperation would become more balanced, and ASEAN would be less dependent on merely other sub-regions like Northeast Asia, while it is opening huge untapped opportunities for ASEAN in South Asia, given the fact that both India and ASEAN keep on going very fast. ASEAN growth is projected 5% in 2017, and it is expected to continue next year. While India has gained its economic recovery, and recently India economy is forecasted to become the third largest economy by the year 2030. And the ties between India and ASEAN have been growing dramatically since the last 25 years, with focus on many fields, including trade, investment, infrastructure, science, technology, cultural, and human resource, and security and defense also. ASEAN becomes India's fourth largest trading partner. In the last decade, trade of India with ASEAN rose from $30 billion in 2007 to $76 billion last year. I believe that we are not far from the target of $100 billion. And ASEAN and India are the part of the world value chain. India's service-oriented economy can complement the manufacturing economy of ASEAN countries. Investment from ASEAN to India has reached $70 billion in the last 17 years, accounting for more than 17% of India's total FDI. India investment in ASEAN during the same period has been more than $40 billion. Institutionally, ASEAN-India cooperation have already got 30 mechanisms or channels, and the two sides also coordinate closely in the multilateral forums such as EAS and ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum. However, if we look at larger picture, ASEAN-India partnership remains not up to the expectation of the two sides and far from our potentials, especially if we compare the data on ASEAN-India trade with trade of each side with other dialogue partners. We think the way forward for ASEAN-India partnership has been identified by both sides. First, we should do our best to enhance India-ASEAN connectivity in all aspects, including physical, digital, land, air, and maritime connectivities. ASEAN and India should have their own connectivity development integrated program. And especially the development of physical connectivity, it would be immediately bring about many economic and non-economic gains. And maritime connectivity should also be focused in the same way with land connectivity, due to the fact that more than 80% of freight is transported through sea. In master plan on ASEAN connectivity, ASEAN 2025, ASEAN has set its goal of making ongoing efforts to strengthen air connectivity with India, namely to conclude air transport agreement between ASEAN and India. We should also review and improve the ASEAN-India future agreement in the manner it can truly facilitate and increase trade, investment, and services between the two sides. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that the issue now is only how we could implement our plan quickly with concrete projects. But I am confident that India and ASEAN will continue to prevail as the dynamic regions of growth. The strengthening partnership between ASEAN and India would be a very important factor for the two sides to keep on growing for the sake of peace, development, security, and cooperation of each country as well as the whole Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for being so succinct and crisp in projecting an optimistic view, a very hopeful view of how integration has been occurring in what you call not Asia, but Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific region today. And you spoke about the two parallel processes, and you made a plea that not merely the economic but security aspects should be particularly taken into consideration. You essentially moved from there to highlight the India-ASEAN relationship, and we noted with interest your candor and frankness in pointing out that ASEAN-India relations have not lived up to their expectations, that they have fallen below their potential. I think that is the kind of realism we need, not only from ASEAN, but also Indian side, to then be able to recognize as to what we need to do for the journey that begins now. You have made a number of positive suggestions that we have heard, and we would have a chance to debate them. But essentially, when we say connectivity, I presume that the responsibility for connectivity rests on the shoulders of both sides. Thank you very much for your intervention. May I now request Rajat Nag to address you.
That's better. Thanks. Thanks very much, Ambassador Bhatia. I'm very glad that Ambassador Tonson Tan started off by talking of not India-ASEAN, but India-ASEAN in a broader context of the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific region.